The sun was sinking behind the jagged mesas of red rock, throwing long, golden shadows across the dusty main street. The town wasn't much. Just a crooked row of clapboard buildings. A church whose bell had long since cracked, and a saloon that leaned a little too far to one side, as though it had been drinking as heavily as the men who frequented it. Eli and Jonah weren't locals. You could tell by the way people stared at them. Two drifters, dust on their boots, guns hanging low, and eyes that had seen more than their share of trouble. They'd been riding for weeks, looking for work, food, or maybe just a place to lay low until their luck changed. Red Rock wasn't much, but it had whiskey, and that was enough for tonight. Inside the Silver Spur saloon, the air was thick with cigar smoke and the sour, sweet smell of spilled beer. The piano player in the corner tapped out a lazy tune while ranch hands gambled, laughed, and slammed down cards with fists big enough to crush a man's jaw. Eli and Jonah kept to themselves at a small table near the back, their hats pulled low, their voices quiet. Jonah leaned in, whispering, "Reckon we can find work here." Eli shrugged, sipping from his tin cup. "Work finds us if it wants to. Till then, we drink." Just then, the swinging saloon doors creaked open. 3 men stepped inside, their spurs jingling with every step. They weren't ranchers, you could see it in their eyes. Hard men. Mean men. The kind who carried guns not for protection but for power. The bartender stiffened. The piano player stopped mid-note. Even the gamblers went silent. Everyone in Red Rock knew who these men were: Clyde Maddox and his gang, the most feared outlaws this side of the Rio Grande. Clyde's boots echoed on the wooden floor as he led his men to a table not 10 feet from Eli and Jonah. He didn't glance at them. Just spat on the floor and poured himself a drink. His voice carried though. Low and gravelly, like a rattler in the brush. "Tomorrow," he said, leaning in close to his men. "Stagecoach leaves Santa Fe Trail at dawn. Army payroll. Gold letters, maybe even some rifles. Easy pickings." One of his men chuckled. "Marshall's on our side, ain't he?" Clyde grinned, showing teeth yellowed from tobacco. "Marshall keep the townsfolk busy. By the time anyone knows what's what, we'll be halfway to Mexico." Eli froze, the whiskey burning hot in his throat. He shot a look at Jonah, whose jaw tightened. The drifters weren't saints, they'd done things they weren't proud of, but this was different. A payroll ambush meant soldiers dead, families ruined, and blood on the dirt. Jonah whispered, barely moving his lips. "Did you hear that?" Eli nodded slowly. "Clear as day." The outlaws kept talking, laughing softly, clinking their glasses as if the gold was already in their pockets. Eli and Jonah sat still, pretending to be drunker than they were, eyes fixed on the worn-out table between them. Every word cut deeper. Every detail sealed the fate of innocent men who would never see the danger coming. When the gang finally left, the saloon exhaled in relief. The piano started up again and conversation returned across us murmurs. Jonah leaned across the table. "We can't just sit on this. If that stage gets hit." Ali cut him off. His voice steady but low. "If we talk they'll call us liars. Strangers don't get believed in towns like this." Jonah's fists clenched. "So we just ride out and let folks die." Eli sighed, staring into the amber depths of his whiskey. He thought about the soldiers. The male, maybe even widows waiting for letters from their husbands at war. He thought about the outlaws' laughter, and the marshal's betrayal. Finally, he set his glass down hard. "No, we tell the marshal, maybe he'll listen." Jonah didn't look convinced. "And if he don't?" Eli adjusted his hat, his eyes cold beneath the brim. "Then we'll deal with what comes." The brothers stood, the saloon's floor creaking beneath their boots. The night outside was colder, the stars sharp and merciless against the desert sky. Somewhere out there, a stagecoach was getting ready to roll at dawn, unaware of the death waiting on the trail. And Eli and Jonah, 2 strangers in a town that didn't trust them, were about to gamble everything on the truth. Morning came slow in Red Rock, the desert sun bleeding red and gold across the horizon. The town stirred awake with the sound of wagons creaking, roosters crowing, and boots crunching against the hard packed dirt of Main Street. Eli and Jonah hadn't slept much. The secret they carried was heavier than the revolvers on their hips. By mid-morning, they walked with purpose toward the marshal's office. The building was squat and square, its paint peeling, the bars on the jail cells rusted. A flag hung limp above the doorway, faded by wind and sun. Marshal Clayton Briggs was a big man, thick-necked, with a silver star pinned to his chest and a mustache waxed sharp enough to cut glass. He was the kind of lawman who looked every bit the part. But the drifters knew now what his badge really hid. Eli stepped forward, tipping his hat politely. "Marshal, we need a word. Urgent." Briggs squinted, sizing them up. "You two again. Didn't I hear you blow in your money at the Silver Spur last night?" "We heard something," Jonah said firmly. "About the stagecoach. It's ridin' into an ambush." The marshal's eyes narrowed. "An ambush, you say? That's a mighty bold claim for a pair of strangers." "We ain't lyin'," Ely pressed, his voice steady. "It's Maddox and his boys. They're planning to hit the payroll. Said you'd keep the town busy while they done it." For the briefest moment, Briggs's face twitched. Barely a flicker. Then he barked out a laugh that carried no humor. "Now that's a story. You callin' me a traitor, son?" Jonah's jaw tightened. "We're callin' it what it is. We heard it clear." The office went silent. Two deputies shifted uneasily at their desks, their hands brushing the butts of their pistols. The air grew thick as gunpowder. Briggs leaned forward, eyes cold. "Lem tell you something about Red Rock. Folks here don't take kindly to strangers stirrin' up trouble. You come in, talking about outlaws and callin' your marshal dirty. That's slander." Before Ely could answer, Briggs's booming voice rang out into the street. "Men, step out here. These drifters got something to confess." Within minutes, a crowd gathered, ranchers, shopkeepers, gamblers still smelling of whiskey. Women clutching shawls tight around their shoulders. Dust swirled in the air as voices rose. "What's this about?" Someone shouted. "Troublemakers, that's what." Another barked. Briggs stepped onto the wooden porch, his badge glinting in the sun. He pointed a thick finger at Ali and Jonah. "These two claim the stagecoach is in danger. Claim Maddox is fixin' an ambush. And worse. They say your marshal's in league with him." The crowd gasped. All eyes turned on the brothers. Jonah's fists clenched, but Ely raised his hands, trying to steady the storm. "We ain't against you folks. We just wanted to warn you. Maddox is riding tomorrow." "Liar," someone in the crowd spat. "Trying to scare us, that's all," another shouted. Briggs's voice cut through like a whip. "You see, they think they can ride in here, so fear, maybe rob the stage themselves when it turns up unguarded. That's what drifters do. They lie. They cheat. And when they're caught, they run." The townsfolk murmured, anger building like thunderclouds. A woman clutched her child and whispered, "They'll bring trouble to all of us." Briggs slammed his hand on the porch rail. "There's only one cure for treachery. Rope." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Deputies grabbed Eli and Jonah, wrenching their arms behind their backs. The brothers struggled, but with half the tide against them, their fight was useless. "Listen to us," Eli shouted, his voice raw. "If you hang us, blood'll be on your hands. Maddox is real, he's riding for the stage, we're tellin' the truth." But their cries were drowned by the roar of the crowd. "Hang 'em! Hang the liars!" The nooses were fetched from the livery stable. Rough hemp rope, thick and scratchy, coiled like snakes in the deputies' hands. The gallows stood waiting at the far end of Main Street. Old wood, gray and splintered, built for justice but too often used for spectacle. As they were dragged through the street, children peeked out from behind skirts, wide-eyed and frightened. Men spat at their boots. Women shook their heads as if judgment had already been passed. Jonah turned to his brother. His voice hoarse. "They're really gonna do it." The lie's jaw set hard, his eyes burning. "Then we die tellin' the truth." At the foot of the gallows, the ropes swung gently in the desert wind. The sun climbed higher, burning hot on the back of their necks. And as the crowd shouted for blood, the drifters knew they weren't just fighting for their own lives. They were fighting against a lie so powerful. It had blinded an entire town. The gallows loomed at the far end of Main Street, a dark silhouette against the blinding morning sun. Built from rough pine logs and weathered by countless hangings before, it stood as a grim reminder that justice in the West was quick, merciless and often blind. The crowd swelled like a tide, filling every inch of dirt road, spilling onto porches, and leaning from second-story windows. The preacher stood solemn at the foot of the wooden platform, Bible clutched tight in one hand. Children clambered onto barrels to see better, their mothers trying half-heartedly to shield their eyes. But no one looked away. Eli and Jonah were shoved forward by deputies, wrists bound tight, ropes biting into their skin. The nooses hung ready, swaying gently in the dry desert wind, their fibers smelling of dust and sweat. Jonah stumbled as he climbed the steps, the wood groaning beneath his boots. "They're really gonna do it," he muttered, his voice low and ragged. Eli's face was set like stone. His hat had been knocked off in the scuffle, his hair damp with sweat, but his eyes burned steady. "Keep your head high, brother. If this is how we go standing tall." A Marshal Briggs climbed the platform behind them, his silver badge catching the sunlight like a cruel star. He addressed the crowd, his booming voice carrying across the square. "People of Red Rock, these men, strangers, drifters, Myers, stand accused of treachery. They claim our town's protector is in league with cutthroats. They spread poison, seeking to shake our trust. There's but one justice for such betrayal." The crowd roared approval. "Hang the liars." Jonah's heart pounded in his chest, each beat loud as a war drum. He looked at Eli. "Ain't nobody comin', is there?" Eli didn't answer. He knew that truthy strangers had no satyrs in towns like this. The deputies slid the rough rope over Jonah's neck, then Eli's. The scratch of hemp against skin was like fire. The stools beneath their boots wobbled slightly, old wood threatening to give way even before the order was given. The preacher stepped forward, voice trembling as he read from the good book. "And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God." His words drifted, drowned by the crowd's hunger for blood. Marshal Briggs raised his hand, signaling for silence. The town fell still. Even the horses tethered nearby seemed to sense the weight of the moment. "By order of the law of Red Rock," Briggs declared, "these men shall hang until dead." A sound split the air. Not the crack of rope, not the preacher's prayer. A rifle shot. The bullet struck the wooden beam above the marshal's head, splintering wood and sending a rain of dust into his hair. Gasps tore through the crowd as heads whipped toward the sound. At the far end of the street, a lone rider thundered into town, dust boiling behind him like smoke from a fire. His horse, a powerful bay with a white blaze, pounded the earth as though it carried the weight of justice itself. It was Jack Callahan, the rancher. Broad-shouldered, sun-scorched, with a rifle still smoking in his hands. His duster coat flapped behind him. His hat pulled low over eyes that cut sharper than a Bowie knife. He reined up hard in front of the gallows, his horse snorting, hooves striking sparks against stone. Jack's voice boomed, clear and commanding. "Not another step, Briggs. You hang them boys, you hang the truth with you." The crowd erupted in confusion. Men shouted, women gasped, children ducked behind skirts. The deputies froze, unsure whether to draw their guns or stand still. Briggs snarled, his face red with fury. "Callahan, this ain't your affair. These men confessed to slander. Justice must be served." Jack leveled his rifle. The barrel steady as a rock. "Justice? You wouldn't know justice if it spat in your face. I've been tracking Maddox and his men for 3 nights. I've seen what they're planning. And I've seen your boots walkin' the same trail as theirs." The words cut deeper than any bullet. The crowd gasped as if struck. "You're lyin'," Briggs barked, but his voice cracked. Sweat glistened on his brow. Jack's voice dropped low, cold and deadly. "Then tell me, Marshal, how'd you come by that gold coin you paid for whiskey with last week?" "Army coin. Straight off a payroll wagon I found stripped to the bone outside Santa Fe." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Heads turned, whispers grew louder. The faith they had placed in their lawmen wavered like a candle in the wind. Eli's chest heaved, hope flickering for the first time. Jonah's eyes widened, his lips parting in disbelief. Jack pointed his rifle toward the ropes above their heads. "These men warned you. You called them liars. But I swear on my ranch, on my land, on every drop of sweat I've spilled plowin' and God's earth, Eli and Jonah speak the truth. Maddox is comin'. And if you don't believe me, Red Rock will drown in blood come dawn." The crowd shifted, unease spreading. Some nodded, others shouted, but doubt had been planted, and it was growing fast. Briggs's face twisted with rage. His hand twitched toward his revolver. "You talk too much, Callahan." But before his gun cleared leather, Jack fired. The rifle cracked like thunder, the bullet whistling past Briggs's hand and shattering the pistol clean out of his grip. The crowd roared in shock, some cheering, some screaming. "No games," Jack growled, "cut them loose." No one moved. The deputies looked at Briggs, then at the rifle, then back at the crowd whose faith was crumbling. Finally, one deputy stepped forward, his knife flashing. With 2 swift cuts, the ropes fell away from Ely and Jonah's necks. The brothers stumbled, gasping for breath. The raw burns on their skin a reminder of how close death had come. Jonah's legs nearly buckled, but Ely steadied him, eyes fixed on the rancher. Jack lowered his rifle, his voice steady but urgent. "Gather your courage, folks. Maddox rides at dawn. Decide now, stand with your marshal or stand with the truth." The town square was silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the scorching air. And for the first time since they'd arrived in Red Rock, Ely and Jonah felt a flicker of hope. The desert night fell heavy, the sky black as coal and scattered with a million stars. Red Rock was restless after what had unfolded at the gallows. Whispers traveled faster than prairie fire, some said Marshal Briggs was dirty, others swore the drifters had tricked the rancher. And many didn't know what to believe. But one thing was certain, the town could no longer pretend nothing was wrong. Jack Callahan didn't waste time. By lantern light, he saddled his bay and motioned for Ely and Jonah to follow. The brothers, still sore from the ropes that had nearly ended them, moved with quiet determination. They had stared death in the eye and lived. Now they would prove the truth with iron and blood. The rancher's voice was low and steady as they rode out of town, hooves muffled on the sandy trail. "Maddox's camp is 20 miles out. In the gulch by Devil's Rock. They've been gathering supplies there. If we strike before dawn, we can catch him with their boots off." Ely rode close, his eyes sharp beneath his hat brim. "You said you had proof." The Jack nodded toward the saddlebag slung across his horse. "Found payroll letters, some Union mail, and a dispatch pouch with the Army's seal. Maddox has been skinning wagons clean and leaving the drivers for buzzards. That was Briggs's silver, no mistake." Jonah spat into the dirt. "And the marshal would have hung us just to keep it quiet." The 3 rode hard through the desert, the cold night air biting against their faces. Coyotes yipped in the distance, and the smell of sagebrush carried on the wind. At last they reached the high ridge that overlooked a narrow gulch. Below, firelight flickered. Shadows moved against the rocks, men drinking, laughing. Their horses tied loosely to mesquite trees. The outlaws were relaxed, unaware of the storm about to break. Jack dismounted, crouching low, and the brothers followed. They crept to the edge of the ridge, peering down at the camp. There they saw him, Clyde Maddox, bigger than life, his long duster coat draped over his shoulders, his revolvers gleaming in the firelight. Around him lounged a dozen men. Rifles stacked against rocks, whiskey bottles passing from hand to hand, and near the camp's edge, under a canvas tarp, lay the stolen goods, chests of gold, sacks of letters, and a half-empty army crate stamped U.S. Ordnance. Jonah's jaw tightened. "That's enough proof for anyone." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Proof don't mean a thing if we don't live to bring it back." They pulled back behind the rocks, whispering fast. "We don't have the numbers," Ely said. "E3. 3 against 12 with surprise." Jack cut in. "That evens the odds." Jonah smirked, loading his Colt. "I like those odds." Jack gave them a sharp nod. "We fire on my mark, aim true, don't waste bullets." The rancher raised his rifle, steady as a mountain, and fired. The shot cracked like thunder, dropping an outlaw before he even rose from his blanket. Chaos exploded, men scrambled, cursing, reaching for guns. Maddox roared like a bull, pulling both revolvers in one motion. Firelight flared, bullets whining through the night. Horses screamed and tore against their tethers, eyes rolling white in panic. Ely fired from cover, his revolver barking 6 times. One outlaw spun and fell into the flames, sending sparks into the sky. Jonah charged down the slope, reckless and wild, firing from the hip. Dust kicked up, muzzle flashes strobing the darkness. "Kill 'em all," Maddox bellowed, his voice carrying over the din. Jack moved like a man born in battle, his rifle reloading fast, each shot ringing true. He dropped 2 more before they even found their feet. Still, the gang was tough, mean men hardened by blood and greed. They regrouped behind wagons, sending a storm of lead whistling toward the ridge. Jonah dove behind a boulder, bullets chipping stone around his head. He grinned through the sweat and smoke. "Ellie. Remind me why we didn't just keep riding." Kneeling with steady aim, dropped another outlaw and answered without looking. "Because trouble finds us either way." The fight raged, hot and close, the gulch filled with gun smoke, the acrid sting burning their throats. Firelight flickered across sweat-soaked faces, shadows dancing like devils on the canyon walls. Then Maddox himself charged, his coat flying behind him, revolvers blazing. He was a giant of a man, roaring curses, bullets spitting fire. Jack swung his rifle toward him, but Maddox's bullet knocked it clean from his grip. The rancher staggered, clutching his arm, blood darkening his sleeve. "Jack!" Eli shouted, breaking cover. He drew his last bullet, took careful aim, and squeezed the trigger. The shot struck Maddox in the shoulder, spinning him back. The outlaw cursed, firing wildly, grazing Eli's hat clean off his head. Jonah rushed forward, tackling Maddox into the dirt. The two men rolled, fists flying, revolvers clattering into the dust. Maddox's strength was monstrous. He wrapped his hands around Jonah's throat, squeezing the life from him. Eli dove, smashing a rock against Maddox's temple. The giant howled, releasing Jonah just long enough for Jack, pale but steady, to swing a rifle butt into Maddox's jaw. The outlaw king fell limp, unconscious in the dust. Silence fell over the gulch, broken only by the crackle of fire and the groans of dying men. The ground was littered with spent shells, blood staining the sand black under the moonlight. Jack steadied himself, his breath ragged. "We got him." "And the proof to bring Briggs down." Jonah, still coughing, nodded weakly. "That was too damn close." Eli pulled the tarp from the stolen goods, the Union seal glinting in the firelight. He looked up at Jack, his voice low but sure. "Tomorrow, Red Rock learns the truth." The rancher lifted his hat, eyes blazing with quiet fire. "Truth don't mean nothin' without courage. Let's hope this town's got some left." The three men stood over the wreckage of the outlaw camp, the desert wind carrying away the last echoes of gunfire. They weren't just drifters or a rancher anymore, they were the only thing standing between Red Rock and ruin. And dawn was only hours away. The sun rose over Red Rock in a blaze of fire and gold, painting the desert sky with streaks of crimson. Dust still clung to Eli and Jonah's coats, their boots scuffed from the night's battle, but they rode into town with heads high. Between them, tied across a mule, was Clyde Maddox, bloodied, bound, and beaten live. Behind him clattered two wagons loaded with gold, army mail, and rifles, all stolen and hidden until now. The people of Red Rock were waiting. Word had spread like wildfire during the night. The rancher, the drifters, and a trail of bodies left in Devil's Gulch. Children clung to their mothers, men stood stiff and uneasy, and women whispered as the riders approached. Jack Callahan dismounted first, dragging Briggs's betrayal into the light for all to see. He pulled the army dispatch pouch from his saddlebag and held it high. "This," he said, his voice ringing out across the square, "was stolen. Letters meant for soldiers of families. Payroll gold for Union men fightin' far from home. And it was hid in Maddox's camp. Same camp I tracked your marshal ridin' to more than once." The crowd shifted uneasily, eyes turning toward Marshal Briggs, who stood on the porch of his office, face pale, lips tight. He opened his mouth to protest, but Eli threw a heavy coin sack at his feet. The pouch burst open, spilling gold stamped with the U.S. Mint. "Army coin," Eli growled. "Same kind you've been spendin' on whiskey while wagons burned and drivers bled dry." A murmur rose through the crowd, swelling into shouts of anger. Briggs's deputies looked at him, then at the drifters, then at the stolen goods. Their loyalty cracked, one by one they lowered their rifles. "You lying dogs!" Briggs bellowed, his voice desperate. He drew his revolver, aiming at Ali. But before the shot rang out, Jonah fired first. His Colt barked and Briggs's gun flew from his hand. The lawman cried out, clutching his wrist, his badge falling to the dust. Jack stepped forward, eyes cold. "You were the law here, Briggs. But law without honor ain't nothin' but a noose around good men's necks." The townsfolk surged forward, seizing their marshal. Some spat in his face, others jeered, but most simply looked betrayed, like children robbed of their faith. Briggs was dragged away to the very jail he once lorded over, his cries drowned by the roar of his own people. In the square, Eli and Jonah stood awkwardly as the mayor, an old man with tired eyes, stepped forward. You saved us, the mayor said, voice thick with shame. We nearly killed you for speaking truth. How can Red Rock ever repay you? Jonah's lips twisted in a half-smile. You can start by listening a mite quicker next time. A laughter rippled through the crowd, soft and nervous, but it carried warmth. The mayor pressed further. We'll see you paid handsomely. Land if you want it. A place here. You'd be welcome. Eli exchanged a glance with his brother, then looked toward Jack. The rancher stood tall. Dust settling on his broad shoulders, his rifle resting in the crook of his arm. Eli's voice was steady. We ain't looking for roots. Trouble follows us, always has. But you remember this. Truth don't come easy. It costs. And men who pay the price for it don't always wear badges. And Mayor lowered his head in respect. Then you'll always have a home here, should you ever come back. Jonah grinned. Best keep a bottle ready then. The brothers turned to Jack, who studied them with quiet admiration. He extended his hand. You boys ride dangerous, but you ride right. My land's always open to you. Don't matter if it's work you need shelter, or just a friend. Eli clasped the rancher's hand, rough palm to rough palm. Jonah followed, shaking with a firm grip. For a moment, no words were needed. The bond between them was sealed in blood fire, and the kind of truth forged only in the darkest hours. By late afternoon, Maddox was locked in chains, Briggs disgraced, and the town finally beginning to breathe again. Children played in the dust, the piano in the saloon rang with a lively tune, and the people of Red Rock spoke of courage, not fear. As the sun dipped low, Jonah and Jack mounted their horses. The sky burned orange and red, the horizon stretching endless and untamed. Townsfolk gathered once more, not to jeer or condemn, but to watch the three men ride. Some cheered. Some wept. Most simply stood in awe. The preacher raised his hand in blessing. Go with God, wherever your trails may lead. Jack tipped his hat. Don't waste prayers on us, preacher. Save 'em for the men who need savin'. With that, the horses moved forward, hooves striking sparks against the fading light. Eli rode in silence, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Jonah hummed softly. A tune from their childhood, rough but steady, and Jack kept pace beside them, his rifle strapped, his eyes hard but proud. Behind them, Red Rock was forever changed. Ahead of them, the desert stretched wide and wild. Filled with more trials, more danger, and maybe, if they were lucky, some kind of peace. The three riders disappeared into the fire of the setting sun. Drifters no longer, but legends etched into the heart of the West.